Okay, so thank you for coming. This is the last kind of official interactive and presentation session that we have with the forum today. This is on REiNS, which is the response evaluation in neurofibromatosis and schwannomatosis. The purpose of this session is to educate you more about REiNS. We're going to update you also on some of the working groups and what they're doing regarding outcomes for specific types of clinical trials and how we all interact and collaborate together. And then we're going to actually have some breakout sessions that relate to this so we can talk to patients about their ideas about what we're doing for outcomes in these specific clinical trials. So the first person to speak is Dr. Scott Plotkin from Mass General, and you know him, and he is the founder and leader of this REiNS craziness.
By now you're sick of having me talk, so I apologize that I'm up here again, although I'm very happy that we have an opportunity for the REiNS organization to update you about what we're doing. We think it's super important to have patients involved, and I hope that we'll convince you of that today, and we hope that you'll participate with us and help us make better clinical trials and better studies. We all have a lot to learn. So, whoops. Okay, so this is the Boston Marathon. It was a beautiful day, rainy and about 42 degrees. And if I think about like where would I want the field to be in 2025 in my daydreaming when I'm supposed to be listening to a lecture, we would love to have a drug to shrink plexiform neurofibromas and a drug that improves cognition in children with NF1 and a drug that reverses hearing loss and a drug that treats, schwannomatosis pain. That's where we want to be, but there's a lot of things that stand in our way, and I think what we're focusing on here in REiNS is some of the technical questions about how do you design a trial to get you to that point. So for example, you're looking for a trial to shrink plexiform neurofibromas. Well, how much shrinkage should it be? 20%, 50%? What is relevant? These sound like technical questions, but until you decide that, you really can't find that drug. For cognition, what is cognition? A very deep question. You heard a lot about that this morning. Is it IQ? Is it math skills? Is it something else? How about hearing loss? How do you measure it? Is it only in the booth that matters? What about real life when you're sitting in a restaurant? Schwannomatosis pain, how do you measure pain? Is my pain the same as yours? And so forth. And so to answer those questions, we developed and brought together a group of people to form the REiNS International Collaboration. This was established, as mentioned before, in 2011. It's a collaboration of people whose goal is to develop standardized response criteria for determining treatment response for patients with NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis, those endpoints that I mentioned in the previous slide. Now, important and critical to our mission is the fact that we're a collaboration across specialties. You're not going to have just a few handful NF doctors make these rules up. You really need to get input from many different areas, and equally importantly, in the topic of today, to include patients and patient representatives in this effort. We believe that a proactive discussion of these endpoints with all of the stakeholders, that includes patients, patient representatives, physicians, pharmaceutical companies, will facilitate approval of and access to drugs that treat these rare conditions. We also know that clinical trials for NF is in its infancy, and that these response criteria that we're developing now are going to change over time as we learn more about the best way to monitor response. And we hope that these criteria are going to allow us to determine treatment efficacy and also to compare it between trials. So if I do a trial in Boston and somebody does a trial here in Atlanta, to make sure if we use the same endpoints, we can compare how well those drugs work. So the REiNS group is divided into now 9 working groups. And you can see them on the left there. Tumor imaging group, a functional outcomes group, a patient-reported outcomes group, whole body MRI, visual outcomes, disease biomarkers, neurocognitive outcomes, cutaneous neurofibromas, and patient representation. Now the first thing I want to, and you can see, and we owe a debt of gratitude to all the group leaders, who I won't go through every name there, but I hope you can see them. One of the things is until about a year ago, we had 7 working groups. We added working groups for cutaneous neurofibroma and also on patient representation. And what that demonstrates, I think, is an openness and a willingness and a hunger to learn what areas should we be covering, what are we not covering, and what should we cover. And we want your advice on that. If there are areas we're not covering, we want to hear about it, and we want your volunteerism, we want your energy to make that happen. We have over 160 active members across 70 institutions and organizations, and the maps below give you an idea of where we have representatives. Now, one of the keys, I see some people taking photos. You don't even have to bother because Pam Walters has been our star who's put together a web page where this will be located. It's open and free to everybody. You can see everything we've ever done. We invite you to come check it out and take a picture of that slide that has our web page. Just type in REiNS collaboration and you'll find us, and all this will be there. And that's consistent with our mission to be open to anybody who wants to participate. So how do we work? Well, I told you we're divided into working groups. That's on the far left here. So the working groups are run by a group leader, a volunteer who arranges monthly meetings, which typically happen by teleconference, and those working group develop recommendations. So the working group on functional outcomes may say, well, we think X should qualify as hearing improvement in a trial for NF2. Eventually, we have full REiNS meetings. These usually happen twice a year, once in June to coincide with the annual CTF meeting, and once in December, which happens in Bethesda. Both meetings are open, where we get together and the working groups will present their recommendations and they will receive feedback from members across the entire REiNS collaboration. Those recommendations, which are approved, then get published, which happens about every 2 to 3 years in a neurology supplement. And that's always my reminder to tell people that the Children's Tumor Foundation has always been instrumental in making this happen, not only in terms of allowing us a venue to meet once a year and giving us a venue like this to talk to you, but also financially to support the publication free for everybody, so any investigator in the world who wants to run a clinical trial in NF can access these recommended guidelines and therefore we hope produce a high quality study. We have many collaborators. You can see them below, CTF and other foundations, the FDA, which you can imagine is a very valuable relationship to have, and just to, sometimes the FDA gets cast in a negative light. They don't move fast enough. No, they move too fast. I can tell you they have been incredible partners in this, and so I have nothing but good things to say about our collaborators at the FDA. We also have collaborations with the Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program that provides new drugs for studies, as well as many aspects of the NIH. And of course, the NIH team and all its members have been hugely valuable in making REiNS successful. So I mentioned that every 2 to 3 years we publish our recommendations, and here are the publications since 2013. There's 6 or 7 there. I'll just read the titles to give you a sense of the breadth of what we're doing. Remember, the challenge in NF is so many different types of tumors, so many different manifestations. It's taken an army of volunteers to really address these various manifestations. So patient-reported outcomes, NF1-associated optic pathway glioma, hearing and facial function in NF2, how to image tumor response, outcomes of pain and physical function, sleep and pulmonary outcomes, neurocognitive outcomes, and whole body MRI, and biomarkers and biobanking. It's an incredible breadth of topics that have been tackled by the group. So we only have a few minutes for this introduction, but I wanted to close on what has been our #1 opportunity and goal for the past, since 2017, so about a little over a year now, year and a half, and that has been inviting patient representatives into REiNS, some of whom are here today, I'm glad to say. So this builds on our mission to engage stakeholders across the spectrum here. And what initially started off as primarily a meeting among investigators now has expanded to include all the groups you see here, including patient representatives, foundations, the FDA, CTEP, Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program, NIH, and pharma. And so building out of that, we decided to engage patient representatives by opening up an application process whereby people who are interested could potentially join the program. And part of the issue is you can't have too many people initially, at least, because it's too difficult, and we wanted to make sure that we were devoting enough resources for the people who were applying. So the way it worked is Pam, me, and Trace Ann's around here somewhere, thank you for the help, put together an application process that really asked people why they were interested and listed about how they were involved. This was an online application that was available starting in September. The deadline was about a month later, and as I mentioned, it included a personal statement and a letter of recommendation because a lot of individuals are working with foundations and other groups, and we thought that was very valuable to learn about. We received 54 applications, really, I think, highlighting, even in this very first round, a lot of interest within the NF community to be part of such an opportunity. And here's really a summary, which you certainly can't read from this side and probably only barely from the side where the slide is, just looking at, well, who are the 30 people that ultimately became patient representatives for our group. Among these 30 people was 17 patients, so that's about 57% of the representatives are patients. Another 40% are a parent of a patient with NF or schwannomatosis, and 1 of 30 is a spouse of somebody with NF or schwannomatosis. Our group is predominantly white, 94% are white, 1% Asian, 1% mixed race. Ethnicity was primarily non-Hispanic. And the reason we point this out is for all the reasons that Vanessa Merker mentioned this morning. Our goal is to make this as representative as we can to capture the experience of people across the spectrum. And so I think one of our goals is to broaden this and include either racial or ethnic minorities into our group. Now, what was incredibly impressive, but not surprising in some ways, was the accomplishment of this group. More than 50% had a graduate degree, another 37% had a college degree, and 10% high school. This was not a requirement, just to be clear. We didn't require any amount of education, but it shows you that people are very accomplished and educated in the sample. In terms of the breakdown among the different forms of neurofibromatosis, 57% of the group was representing NF1, another 37% NF2, and 7% representing schwannomatosis. So we asked people, what are you interested in? Like, what group do you want to be on? And I wanted to show the data because it's kind of interesting. Now, in defense of those individuals who joined the group, they didn't know exactly what the groups were doing. So I'm not sure they would have the same choice now. So I present this just out of interest, but take it with a grain of salt. So if you look just at your top choice, what we call top box analysis, what was your number one choice? The most popular group was patient-reported outcomes. I think that's because of Pam Walters, but of course they didn't know her at that point. But there was a lot of interest in disease biomarkers. The third most popular was tumor imaging, followed by functional outcomes, whole body MRI, neurocognitive outcomes, visual outcomes, and cutaneous neurofibromas. I cannot, for the life of me, explain why cutaneous neurofibromas was not more highly selected. And it's not a problem, it's just interesting. And I think it shows you there's a lot of room for us to learn where the interest and energy is. If you looked at the top 3 choices, I won't go through these verbally, just to say it was virtually the same ranking, whether you looked at the top choice or the top 3 choices. So what is the progress to date? This is my last slide, just to say that if you're curious about how hard people are working, it's about 2 to 3 hours a week, maybe a tiny bit more in some of the groups, maybe less in some of the groups. And I think the most common feedback we've heard so far is that some of the working groups seem very active and others are not. So if you got, every patient representative was assigned to a group. If you got assigned to a group that wasn't active, you're probably doing virtually no work, probably 1 hour a month on one of our calls. But if you have a group that's really active, you could be doing more. That's been challenging. People join because they want to work, not because they don't want to work. And so for the groups that haven't been active, it's been somewhat disappointing. Having said that, everything here is volunteerism, and it's natural in the course of REiNS that some groups are active at certain times and not others. So it's a challenge, but it's the way it goes. And the impact of patient representatives has been, I would argue, very significant. Number one, in the presentations that we try to give. I tried to send my presentations out to a few people. Greg Erickson and Edith Garrett read mine and provided some feedback, and I'm very grateful for that. We know now that when investigators give talks at forums like this, we often miss the mark. We're either too technical or don't explain ourselves well. And I think our presentations are better from having input from our patient representatives. We've also been working very hard. Dominique Pichard and Ashley Cannon have been working on a question with their group on a questionnaire for cutaneous neurofibromas, and I think that process has been deeply influenced by the experience of patients and their feelings about it, as well as trial design. So I would say, from my perspective, there's been a lot of influence, and you'll hopefully hear about this very shortly. And I'll just close by saying the feedback I've gotten from investigators has been extremely positive, that those people feel that the input has been very valuable. And so progress to date, I would say double thumbs up. Hope to report back at some point and more formally. I will say that our goal for our next supplement is to include a manuscript on patient representation and on what's worked well and what hasn't worked well. So that'll be a very interesting manuscript to read. So I'll be happy to answer any questions before turning it over to our next speaker, if there are any. Please.
If somebody wanted to be involved, not me, because I'm already involved, but if somebody wanted to become involved, who's the direct person they would need to contact to become more involved?
Are you going to answer that in your talk, or should I? The question is, if somebody's interested in participating, how would you go about it? Who should you contact? What do you think, Pam? Is that in your talk? I'll let you do it, but the answer is, as you will learn today, the learning curve for patient representatives is very steep. There's a lot to learn. So you don't want to turn over the people very quickly. At this, we haven't solidified this. This is part of the discussion we'll have in the patient representation group, is how long should the first groups serve? We're thinking 2 to 3 years. How should it turn over? Should everybody be forced to reapply? Should only people who want to? I don't know the answer to that, and I think we're going to have to figure that out amongst ourselves, which is how we've done it. So I would say I do not anticipate that being a full patient representative is likely to turn over the next year or two. I do think that coming to our winter meeting is open to everybody, so that you don't have to be a representative to do that. And if you happen to be at the CTF conference, either in Paris or the year after, that meeting is open also. Please.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. I've been looking for an opportunity to ask this question, and I think it's here because you brought up the FDA.
Oh goodness, I hope I can answer this.
So as you are fully aware, we have an opioid crisis.
I know, yeah.
Technology and, okay.
FDA.
FDA. So as you are aware, we have an opioid crisis to combat pain as a result of trying to combat pain, and NF has a significant amount of pain involved in it, and it is the drug that the medical community had to offer to combat pain. But as you know, many states have licensed medical marijuana to combat pain that is not an addictive and won't kill you, which opioids will. The only reason the FDA has not approved medical marijuana for the use of pain management is because there are no research studies out there showing that it is an effective use. But if you talk to, doctors off the table, they will say, hey, give it a try. We know patients have found significant relief from pain. Having a 24-year-old who was addicted to the Vicodin he was prescribed and having to wean him off, went down this route of medical marijuana. I grew up in the 70s. It has a history to it that everybody goes, and I go, yes, but it's not going to kill him. So do you foresee any clinical studies that would eventually, at some point, legitimize the use of medical marijuana for the use of pain in NF?
Great question. So I'm very deeply invested in the question of pain, particularly as it relates to schwannomatosis patients, but also NF1 patients tend to get a lot of pain, and some NF2 patients. And there is nothing I would like more than to get data on medical marijuana. It's something we would love to do. It creates a lot of smoke and not much fire in our clinics. Yeah. So funny. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And the reason I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, when you have a federal government that says no and the state government says yes, I cannot get a source of medical marijuana to run a clinical trial. So I'm going to give you Scott Plotkin's belief. Other investigators here may differ. I don't believe there's value in doing a half study where you just survey people. I think it has to be controlled, it has to have a placebo, and it has to be done correctly, and that's a real study. And you need money and you need drug. I don't see any way of getting drug at this point. Although my hope is things are changing because pain is now one of the main issues facing our medical community. And so I'm hopeful. We'll do it. Let's put it that way. I don't want anyone here to think that the community is not behind finding a better pain treatment than we currently have. It's just the amount of work it takes and the red tape make it almost impossible at this point. If somebody else feels differently, please jump up. Can't you run the study? Herb says, can't you run this study in the states where it's legal? You still got to get the drug. There's only one drug dispensary to my knowledge. I'm talking about medical grade drug. I'm not talking about what's made in my, there's one 3 blocks away from my house, a dispensary in Brookline. That's where all the high school kids hang out. I cannot get it from them because it has to have a certain purity and USP, da-da-da-da-da. So the answer is no. It comes from Alabama, is my understanding. Maybe Bruce knows. Where they, and then you need funding. Now, if there's enough interest and you can raise private funds to do this, that will solve half the problem, and then the issue becomes, can you get the drug? And maybe that's a different issue, but to run a real trial, to get funded on top of getting drug, I see that as being a major barrier. How much does it cost? You'd have to price it out. I don't know. You'd have to do all kinds of calculations to figure out how many patients. I don't know. But you don't have to do fancy MRIs, so it'll be cheap that way. Last question, I think. Oh. Had a question?
Yes, so on the list of the different topics for the advocate, why was there not one on pain management?
Do you mean, so it's a great question, and we actually have studied pain. Pam Walter's group, she'll probably talk about it under, whoops, sorry. This is it. I'll make everybody sick. Do you see the group that has patient-reported outcomes? That group has been very interested and has published, I'll show you, and I'm using it in my current study. Let's see, it's on the right side, the second bullet point. It says outcomes of pain and physical functioning. So we actually do have an agreed upon way to measure this. And I think the barrier is no longer, can we measure the pain? The barrier is getting the drug, getting the money. What about spinal ablation? Well, one could consider a trial of other pain treatments, and I guess it depends on whether there's somebody who wants to champion that. Certainly, that would not be my biggest interest, just because patients often have more than one tumor, and I'm not sure a single pain injection is going to be the right way, but there may be other investigators who think that that's the right way to go.
I just want to say we are incorporating the measures in clinical trials now for MPNST, for plexiform neurofibromas, and we can, for example, with the selumetinib in a number of patients, really measure an improvement in pain. So I think that's something that's very important to include in future studies. The other point I wanted to make, Scott, as you brought up REiNS in Paris, I was asked by a few patient representatives what is going to happen in Paris. I don't know if you'll talk about that, but that might be a good way for them to decide if they want to go to Paris in November.
Everybody should want to go. I've never been, so I'm excited. So just in 20 seconds, we're at the Paris meeting. We have 2 primary goals. One is all of our groups are trying to get their recommendations in order for the meeting. I'll highlight one group in particular, although most of the groups will be presenting their recommendations. The one I think that'll generate the most interest will be the cutaneous neurofibroma group. where we're going to be proposing, I think for the first time, what the endpoint should be for a trial like that and how a trial should be designed. And the goal is to get feedback from the European Medicines Agency, which is the FDA equivalent across the pond, and will then be presented to the FDA later after that. So it'll be an interesting meeting, I hope. One, there'll be our usual stuff, as well as the first time ever kind of open discussion about cutaneous neurofibromas. So please join us if you're going to be in Paris.
Thank you, Scott. And I just wanted to add a note to the question about the pain measures. So we have identified, using our systematic review process, the pain measures that we think will work best in NF, but we actually have a study going on that we use focus groups and interviews and to develop pain scales that are specific for people with NF1. So we're still working on those, but we're getting closer, and they will be FDA approved. We hope at the end of this it adds to the process, but so that is something that we are actively working on.